This is the overview video explaining how to answer question 2 on paper 3. We're going to be looking at what the examiner will be expecting for you to do in this question, and then what you can do to score as many marks as you can. The question will always look like this. It will say, explain why, then it will give you 2 stimulus points, and then say that you must also use information of your own. This will be for 12 marks. This is the mark scheme. Now you will see that 6 of those marks were awarded for AO2, which is your analysis of causation. Now remember, the questions asked you to explain why. So essentially you need to be addressing the factors that you think led to this particular event or development and explaining why you think they caused that particular event or development. The other 6 marks will be awarded for AO1, and that is for your knowledge and understanding of aspects of the period. So that's your opportunity to bring in evidence from the stuff that you already know to show the examiner that you know the topic really well. Now it's important to note that you are given 2 stimulus points in the question. You're more than welcome to use those in your answer. You don't have to, but you can. But it's important to notice that you will hit what's called a mark ceiling if you don't explore points beyond the stimulus point. So that means that you can't actually score in the highest bands or get the top marks if you're only talking about what the stimulus points have already told you. That's why AO1 is so important. Make sure you're showing the examiner that you can bring in evidence from your own knowledge. Finally, it's important to note that the AOs depend on each other. That means that no matter how well you do in one of the AOs, if your performance isn't quite as good in the other one, or maybe you haven't included any of the other one, then you can't progress into the higher bands, and that again is a mark ceiling. These are the bottom 2 bands for this question. You might notice that we're seeing words like straightforward, not developed, general, lack of coherent organisation. So in terms of AO2, and remember that that is your analysis of causation, that means that maybe you've listed the factors that you think led to this event, but you haven't really explained them in enough detail. Maybe you haven't linked it back to the topic the questions asked you to focus on. Or maybe you just need to explain them further to make it really clear to the examiner what it is you're trying to argue. In terms of AO1, we might see that the knowledge is a little bit limited and that you haven't maybe brought in enough evidence from your own knowledge to show the examiner that you do know the topic. So just make sure that you are bringing in evidence, as long as it's relevant, to show the examiner that you can use that evidence to support your argument. Now let's take a look at the top 2 bands. Now you'll see here that we've got words like analytical, consistently directed towards the question, coherent line of argument, logically structured. So in terms of AO2, top band answers will analyse exactly what the questions ask them to. They've taken the topic and they've thought about it from different points of view. They've made it clear that they can explain their answer in detail, bringing in evidence from their own knowledge in terms of AO1, and making sure that every comment they make is linked back to their initial argument. It should be easy for the examiner to follow what you're trying to say. Remember, you're trying to make it as easy as possible for them to give you the marks, so make it clear what you're trying to argue. And just to return briefly to AO1, top band answers will pick small bits of evidence that are very precise and really help to enhance the argument that they've already made. And that shows the examiner that you've got a really detailed knowledge of the topic. Here's an example of a question 2. This asks, explain why Mao enforced collectivization from 1953. You may use the following in your answer: mutual aid teams, peasantry. You must also use information of your own, and that would also be for 12 marks. Here's the mark scheme for this question. So one point that you could have included was that establishing collective farms or agricultural cooperatives and promoting collective techniques was intended to promote agricultural efficiency. And then you can bring in here some great contextual knowledge. You can say how the Chinese population was rapidly increasing at this point, so it was a priority for Mao to increase food availability. And bringing in contextual evidence like this, explaining it, making sure you've linked it back to the question, is a very nicely developed point. It's concise, it's logical, it's very clear what you're trying to get across, And that is exactly what the examiner would be looking for.